right, hello everyone, good evening, and welcome to the Marshall W. Allworth Planetarium. My name is Jessica, I am the director, and will not be doing your show this evening. Second Saturday, oh my goodness, it's been a very long day. Second Wednesday of the month is run by the Arrowhead Astronomical Society. So tonight we're going to be having a show by Eric Norland on Apollo 11. Before I turn it over to him, though, a couple of things. If you need to leave at any time during the show, you are welcome to do so. You'll just exit through the same door you came in, which I'll get that shut in just a second. If you do go out in the middle of the show, just, obviously be careful because it does get dark in here. But that's why we have the glow strips around the wall so that you can find your way out. And if you need them, bathrooms are down in the main building entrance by the big telescope. Yeah, I think that's it for me. So I'm gonna get the door closed and hand it over to Eric.
Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming this evening. So I'm sure there's a few of you in the audience that remember 55 years ago, the big event that happened. That was Apollo 11. And I can remember being on my grandparents' farm. We watched it live on TV, Neil Armstrong going down the ladder. And my dad said, "Can you imagine? We can see the moon up there and there's some men up on the moon." And they were just amazed at that feat of technology. So we do know a lot about astronomy and about the cosmos, but we really have not ventured far into it, just to the moon. Haven't gone beyond that. And humans are amazing explorers. All the evidence points to humans coming out of Africa about 100,000 to 300,000 years ago and forking off. Some went up into Europe, others went towards India, and others continued as far as Australia. Other groups went through the islands of Tahiti, Easter Island, may have gone to South America, but it more than likely was the Bering Bridge that allowed people to migrate down into the Americas. But humans are just amazingly intuitive at moving around the world. So here again, out of Africa and forking off into India, across Asia, over the Bering Bridge to North America and all the way down to South America. So long ago that it's just hard to even fathom. And at one time, North America was covered with ice. A mile thick glacier covered North America. Sea levels dropped because the ice went up into making glaciers. And so places that were generally islands were land bridged. There was ways to move across, and there was the Bering Bridge up here. So there's the Bering Bridge moving into North America. Another group may have come out of Europe and gone into North America. And some of the evidence is this Clovis spear point dating back to like 40,000 years ago. It appears to have come from Europe and is called the Solutrean Point, very similar to what was found in Oregon and Clovis, New Mexico. Very same style of craftsmanship. So that would link the two. And they have even found spear points in mammoth bones. So there were hunters here long ago. Once again, moving through the Bering Bridge down in North America. Tremendous accomplishment for human beings. What's even more amazing is the Polynesians, how they moved around the South Pacific. They'd go all the way from Tahiti to Easter Island to Hawaii and other islands as well, using celestial navigation. They could tell the patterns of the stars, and one of the stars that was prominent was Arcturus. When it was at a certain time of year and they saw Arcturus, they could follow it towards Hawaii or just the reverse towards Tahiti. And they knew the ocean currents, so they were pretty good navigators. Then there's Leif Erikson, about the year 1000, crossing the Atlantic to Iceland and Greenland and coming into North America at Newfoundland and Vinland. Marco Polo ventured all the way from Jerusalem to Beijing, mostly walking and riding donkey, but an amazing accomplishment and open trade routes. The Chinese built some of the first ocean crossing ships. There is some evidence that they may have landed in Washington and interacted with the native people. Then there's Christopher Columbus. 1492, he crossed the Atlantic and discovered islands and places where there was already people. So he thought he was in Japangu, Japan, and he named the people Indians, and he was really in a whole different place. But what an accomplishment, a great explorer using these interesting ships, 3 of them to cross the Atlantic. Now, in about 1850, 1860, Jules Verne came out with this book called From the Earth to the Moon. And he named this ship Columbia. Well, it's a corruption. It's a little different, Columbiad or something like that. But anyways, he talks about a journey to the moon, lands on the moon with a rocket. And it was very influential to many people. And one of them was Wernher von Braun, but he was a powerful impact on the President of the United States, John F. Kennedy. And I'm going to try my Kennedy accent. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. And that was a big influence in about 1962 to try to get Americans on the moon before the Russians. And it was called the space race. And they built the great Saturn V rocket that Apollo missions would use, and to put 24 astronauts on the moon. 12, maybe, was it 12? Forgot. But here's Apollo 11. We've got Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Buzz Aldrin. Now, Buzz Aldrin had a PhD in celestial mechanics. Neil Armstrong was a fighter pilot, and Michael Collins was as well, plus had a lot of knowledge of navigation. So they were the team that would go on Apollo 11. They each had extraordinary skills. Neil Armstrong was known for his confidence and capability of pulling off some difficult feats in flying. Here's Jim Lovell. He would later pilot Apollo 13 and have that incident occur. Here's Mission Control, very important place in Houston for guiding Apollo 11. On the morning of the launch, the astronauts got geared up and had to crawl into the small space. It was like a small car the capsule of Apollo 11. And here is Werner von Braun. Now, it's a kind of ironic that he actually was a captured Nazi, a German soldier or a German employee of rocket building. He built the V2 rocket and worked on the buzz bomb. But he brought this whole dream, this vision of flying into space with rockets. And he was very influential. We probably could not have done it without him. So again, one of the ironies of war, that it somehow brings people together in strange ways. So the Saturn V was made up of several stages. The first stage used 5 F-1 rockets, each generating 1.5 million pounds of thrust. So the total would be 7.5 million pounds. Inside of this area carried LOX, or liquid oxygen, and kerosene. And it was in the next stage too, and the next stage after that. But as the upper stages started to use hydrazine. So when the Saturn V launched, it would burn 3 tons of fuel each second. Each second equaled Lindbergh's flight across the Atlantic in fuel. It's an incredible feat. This thing weighed as much as a battleship. It was the equivalent of 400 elephants. So it's a monster. It's really amazing feat to design this. Here's the lower stage. You can see the liquid oxygen tank, the fuel tank for kerosene, and the same thing up here, using kerosene and liquid oxygen. And these things are designed just like a big gulp drink, just break down the hatch. And it would go up to 15,000 miles per hour in a couple of 2.5 minutes. So it was just an amazing machine. And there were about 7 of them that launched, and they didn't have any problems, no safety problems. But curiously enough, almost all of the design engineering drawings were lost. You can't imagine it. So we can't hardly build the Saturn V again. But what a titan when it took off. It was just a monster. This is the command module up here where the astronauts are strapped in. Inside of here is where the lunar lander is located. Here's a safety rocket to lift the capsule away in case of a disaster. They say that if the whole rocket blew up, it would be like the sun, like an atom bomb going off. It would be extremely terrible. But it never did happen. They were very reliable rocket engines. Now, one of the problems with having 5 rocket engines is that one could fail and jeopardize the mission. But again, it didn't happen. So SpaceX is building a similar large rocket which uses about 30 or 35 engines, just in case a couple go, it doesn't create a problem. Here is President Johnson and Vice President right here. No, that's not the Vice President. Is that Spiro Agnew? Does anybody know? Lady Bird Johnson watching the launch. And people just frolicked to go see this event. Here's in '69, here's a camper truck and some tents. And not that far different than today. And what an amazing thing to see a launch. I never did go see one. I saw the space shuttle land in California. But this must have been quite an event. And of course, they got up to altitude where they could see that the Earth is a sphere. It's not flat. And it took about 4 days to get to the moon, 3 days and a half to get there. And what they did was they went around the backside of the moon and then began a 10-mile approach down to the landing site. And, it would gently start descending in altitude. But here is the Sea of Tranquility. This is kind of the man on the moon. This is his eye right here. He's got this spot between his eyes. And it looks like a man in the moon, a face, mouth right here. And they chose Sea of Tranquility because it was rather safe, not so heavily cratered and smoother. But when Neil Armstrong came down, he was off course a little bit. And he had to decide where to land in this field of craters. And he decided to choose a spot that was rather near to a crater. This is the interior of the lunar lander. And what an amazing machine. They would start the process backwards, going down backwards towards the landing site, and then flip around so the landing gear was down at the last 50 miles or 100 miles, so that they landed gear down. But it was quite a maneuver to do that. Now, you can see that there are many switches here. And Buzz Aldrin accidentally hooked his suit on one of the switches and broke it. Now, it just happened to be the switch that would allow the ascent, when they wanted to leave the moon, the ascent engine to work. And Buzz came up with an idea with Houston to stick a ballpoint pen into the switch and keep it up. And it worked. And it was July the 20th, 1969, when the Eagle landed. And the command module was called Columbia, named after the Jules Verne book. And this thing had probes on a few of the skids. You can see this probe here. But they were really concerned. Here's a probe right here. They didn't put it on all of them, I read, because they were concerned that it would fold up and then tear an astronaut's suit, causing it to puncture and putting him in jeopardy. So when the Eagle came down, Neil Armstrong wanted to be close to this crater called Little West. He thought that would be interesting to explore. And he was really not given permission to do that, to go and explore it, but he later would hike down into the crater. And I kind of like his gumption. Here again is the lunar lander. Here's the crater, Little West. And there was a lot of cheering when he landed on the moon. Now, there's some discussion about what Neil Armstrong said. One small step for a man, but it was one small step for man. He says that he actually said a man, but the microphone kind of garbled, and it changed history. This was for mankind, not just for a man. And that was quite an instrumental way to say it. Now, this is not Neil Armstrong, this is Buzz Aldrin coming down the ladder. And this was a 3.5-foot step to get down the last part. And Buzz Aldrin wanted to be very sure that he did not close this door and latch it, because it would have kicked on the air system and pressurized the cabin. and they probably would not have gotten back in. This door was so powerful. So he had to make sure that that door did not lock. And wouldn't that have been kind of a tragedy? They actually made a memo saying that there's been a terrible atrocity on the moon and the astronauts have died. But they didn't have to do it. They didn't have to read it because they pulled it off. So Neil Armstrong carried the camera, and he took a picture of Buzz Aldrin. This was a Sears Roebuck flag that they stuck a piece of metal in, and it was hard ground. It was difficult to push it in, and they pushed as hard as they could, and it appeared as if the flag was kind of waving, but there's no wind on the moon. And I do believe that there was a camera, a TV camera, that was watching Neil Armstrong come down the ladder. So here's Buzz Aldrin. Remember, Neil has the camera. And you can see the visor showing Neil right up in that region. And one of the things that said that Neil Armstrong said was, "Isn't it a beautiful view?" And Buzz Aldrin said, "Amazing, desolate." What did he say? I forgot. A very desolate country, but they thought it was beautiful, that view of the moon where they were. And now this is Neil Armstrong. He's got the camera right there. And you can see here's the other astronaut, Buzz Aldrin. And President Nixon called and says, "I want to congratulate you fellows." And Neil Armstrong set this camera down in the lunar soil, the regolith, and it kind of blended in. He didn't find it again. Here's one of the astronauts. Here's the other long shadow of an astronaut. And so years later, Neil Armstrong was speaking at a group, and this guy said, "No, how do we know that it wasn't fake? It was fake to this whole thing." Neil Armstrong coolly said, "Someday, somebody's going to revisit that site and find my Hasselblad camera I lost." That's good evidence right there that we were there. So here's the first footprint on the moon. And they could be there for a million years. But probably tourists will visit this spot and, desecrate it. There were 3 science exhibits set up. One was a laser reflecting instrument, like a mirror, and it's still in use today. The other was a seismic instrument and some kind of a solar count instrument. And they set these science exhibits up. And like I said, the laser reflector still works. But these footprints could be there a long time. Here is one of the astronauts setting up the science experiment. They only spent about 2.5 hours on the moon, hiking around, moving around, walking on the surface. Later missions like Apollo 17 would spend 22 hours on the moon doing exploration. So the Apollo 11 crew stayed about 2 days, not very long, and they gathered about 48 pounds of rock. This is the ascent stage, which generated about 3,500 pounds of thrust. And according to the astronauts, it was a smooth ride when they left the platform on the moon. And then they went back up to dock with Michael Collins and Columbia. And then it was a matter of returning back to Earth. And Buzz Aldrin was rather good at calculating where to land, but they were in the Pacific somewhere. I think it was a bit of a ride to get to their landing site. But they were in good shape. They survived everything just fine. And then they were required to go into isolation for 2 weeks because they were concerned about pathogens. So here's a Apollo 11 capsule being loaded into the ship. And here is the isolation that the astronauts had to endure for 2 weeks. And they were visited by the president, Nixon, and others to kind of cheer them up. But later missions did not have to do this. They didn't find any pathogens on the moon. It's pretty sterile. Here's President Nixon visiting. Here are some of the 48 pounds of rock. Now, I just want to show you that it says right here, 2 millimeters. That's small. These are small samples. But here is something right here that is very similar to what is up on the North Shore underneath the lighthouse at by Silver Bay. It's called a northosite, and it's rather light white color. And here's some other basalt, different kinds of basalt, breccia or breccia. And quite a variety of rocks were discovered and brought back and analyzed. And other Apollo missions would bring many more pounds. This was 48 pounds. I think Apollo 17 brought 200 pounds back. So they are really of scientific value to study, understanding what happened on the moon. It was heavily bombarded by asteroids or meteorites. And here in the Smithsonian is Apollo 11. You can see what the heat did when it re-entered the atmosphere. And they had a ticker tape parade in New York City. The astronauts, were given a lot of fame. And for Neil Armstrong, it kind of rubbed him wrong. He just kind of felt it was a little too much or something, but he did go into teaching and was a professor of aeronautics or something like that. Now, here's the Apollo 11 landing site. And way up in this area here, it says camera, and it has an arrow pointing to it. And now I know that they set up a camera to watch, and that on the news you could watch the astronauts. It could be that, or else it is Neil Armstrong's Hasselblad camera that's pointing out where it is up there. These are the other missions, Apollo 12 and 14. And here was the great Apollo 17. If you get a chance, watch it on YouTube. These guys were just full of enthusiasm. They were geologists, and they were just excited about exploring the moon. And they had the lunar rover too. So a lot was learned. If you have a portable vacuum, those were invented for the Apollo missions. Computers are today 10 times as fast as the Apollo computer. So computers really grew in stature over the years. Tang was used on the Apollo missions and became very popular in stores. There are a lot of things that are impacted by the Apollo missions. And one big one is rather subtle, but it was when I think his name was Bill Adler, or he was on Apollo 16. He took a photo of the Earth rising up above the lunar environment, planet Earth. There it was. And to see the Earth rise and everybody's in from the Earth, it was a powerful photo. And it used to be in here, but I don't know if it is anymore. But great, great things came out of the missions, and some say it wasn't worth it. It was a huge expenditure. It would probably cost billions of dollars. It would cost millions of dollars just to launch each Apollo mission. And so I think a lot was gained, but hopefully we'll go back with even bigger ambitions. These are the sites where the Apollo missions landed. There's Tranquility Base. And these are called the Lunar Highlands. They landed in those regions. I think it would be great to explore the Apennines. And like it says, to this day, nobody has left the Earth-Moon orbit. And nobody's been born in space yet. So we're all from the same place, and that's pretty amazing. So who might be the next great explorer? Well, I wish I could say it would be me, but I think that would be great to go to the moon and, have something go haywire, probably, but what a great experience. And some of these mountain ranges on the moon are just tremendous. They're sheer drops. And wouldn't that be a great place to visit and explore? We have not by any means explored the moon. There is still so much to discover. There will be lots to discover, and new innovations will come out of it. So hopefully we'll make it there in the next few years and begin that process. So humans, once again, are amazing explorers. And Apollo 11 was one of those examples. Does anybody have any questions? Anybody would like to go to the moon in this group? No? Maybe. Not that I know of. I don't think the Russians ever tried it. And the Chinese are kind of knocking on the door. It might happen. They did land a spacecraft on the back side of the moon. And it isn't really the dark side of the moon. But the whole moon gets 2 weeks of daylight and then 2 weeks of darkness. So the Chinese, I think, did land a spacecraft on the backside of the moon. So maybe they're thinking about doing it. Well, tonight, if you go out, look to the southwest and you'll see the new moon. It's just 4 days old. Is that, Tom, what it is? So it's kind of a thin crescent, but look to the southwest. And then if you get up in the early morning hours, after midnight, you can see Saturn rising up pretty high in the sky, and then you can't quite see Neptune and Uranus, and Mars is there, and eventually Jupiter. In the evening is Venus and Mercury to the west. In the morning, you've got the other planets. So get up early. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.